The Galactic Empire had known countless victories. Spanning thousands of star systems and countless species, it believed itself unshakable, an immovable force in the universe. To them, humanity was merely another curious species among many, a minor footnote on the edge of the known galaxy. But what the Empire failed to grasp was that they had never faced a race like ours. They underestimated the indomitable human spirit, and in their arrogance, they believed us weak. They believed peace was the only language we understood. But as they would soon learn, when pushed to the edge, humanity fights back with everything it has, and then some. The first contact was almost peaceful. Empire emissaries arrived in orbit around Earth in their shimmering fleet of massive warships. Their ships gleamed like knives under the sun's light, casting shadows that stretched over entire cities. The Empire's leaders did not bring greetings or extend open arms. Instead, they brought demands for servitude, tribute, and submission. They believed their show of force alone would be enough. They had done this dance many times before, each time ending with their new subjects bowing willingly or grudgingly. But this was not the path they would take with Earth. We listened. We heard every polished word from the silver-toned Empire envoy that echoed from their ship's loudspeakers. We listened and nodded, playing our part, waiting. For behind every pilot's smile and diplomatic gesture lay minds spinning with plans, strategists, and warriors who had tasted human history's blood-soaked pages. We knew what would happen if we bowed, so we chose a different path. We made it clear our world would not kneel. It was as if, for the first time, the Empire realized they had miscalculated. The Empire's response was swift. One of their ships descended from orbit, a lumbering beast of polished metal and death. When it landed in the heart of a major city, the ground quaked beneath its weight. Metallic spires emerged from the ship's hull, like spears aimed at the sky. Soldiers in gleaming armor marched forth, an overwhelming tide of technology and tradition. They believed this display of might would instill fear. But in that moment, fear was replaced with something else in the eyes of every human who saw it: anger. Our leaders offered one final chance to talk, one more moment of diplomacy. But to the Empire, dialogue with a conquered people was a waste of breath. Instead, they marched into the city center and declared themselves its new rulers. They gave us 1 hour to comply, to surrender. We gave them our answer before the sands of their hourglass could fully fall. No one expected the explosion. No one predicted humanity's first strike would come not from above, but from below. Resistance fighters, ordinary people armed with whatever weapons they could muster, launched a desperate assault on the towering Imperial ship. Fire and smoke filled the air, alarms blared, and confusion erupted among the Imperial ranks. Within minutes, the first cracks appeared in their invincible facade, and for the first time in centuries, the Empire faced a species that refused to be tamed. In the chaos, messages went out across Earth. The battle had only begun, and the world braced for what would follow. This was a fight not for conquest, but for survival, ours and possibly theirs. Because when humanity fights, we fight with all that we are, all that we can be. In that moment, the galaxy shifted, and so too did the Empire's understanding of their adversary. But even then, none of us could truly fathom what the days ahead would bring: the fury, the sacrifice, and the line that would blur between hero and monster. The hourglass emptied. War had come, and there was no turning back. The world watched as plumes of smoke curled into the sky, a dark signal of what had just begun. In one blinding moment, humanity had crossed a line that could never be walked back. Across the globe, eyes turned to screens, listening, waiting, holding breaths that seemed suspended between fear and something else: defiance. Even in the chaos, as sirens screamed and people scrambled to safety, one thing became painfully clear: we were at war, and the enemy was like none we had faced before. To the Empire, this rebellion was little more than a flare-up to be extinguished. They underestimated us again. The armored soldiers they had deployed, gleaming and unblemished, met a relentless resistance in the crumbling streets. Ordinary people, students, mechanics, parents, soldiers, became something more. They became fighters. Some armed themselves with repurposed weapons. others with grit and resolve alone. Our technology could not match the Empire's, but our will was something else entirely. Every alley and street became a battlefield, every rooftop a vantage point. We turned the terrain of our cities into traps, using every ounce of our ingenuity to slow the invaders down. One man, his face streaked with sweat and grime, crouched behind a broken wall. He was a father who had kissed his children goodbye just hours earlier, promising to protect them. His hands trembled as he held a rifle, scavenged and barely working. Across the way, a young woman, her eyes blazing with the fire of a life she refused to surrender, reloaded a grenade launcher she barely knew how to use. The soldiers they faced had armor that deflected bullets, weapons that hummed with energy no human technology could match. But for every Imperial step forward, another trap was sprung, another act of defiance lit up the dark. The Empire's leaders, monitoring from their hovering fleet, were baffled by our resistance. In their long reign, they had tamed countless worlds. Most had succumbed to the Empire's overwhelming might. Some had been crushed after token resistance. But never had they faced an enemy that dug in and refused to break. Never had their assumptions been so wrong. They saw us as primitive, fractured, incapable of unity. They did not see the fires that burned in every human heart. Within hours, whispers of other resistance pockets reached the ears of commanders and underground leaders. Messages of hope and defiance spread like wildfire. Cities under siege shared tactics, resources, and courage. The human network, born of desperation and determination, grew stronger with every passing minute. Even as the Empire tightened its grip, we slipped through their fingers, striking where they least expected. Yet, even as we fought back, shadows crept among us. Not every human was willing to fight. Some, fearing the inevitable destruction, turned to collaboration, hoping to save themselves or find some place of power within the Empire's new order. Their whispers of betrayal sowed seeds of doubt among us. Who could be trusted? Who would stand their ground? And who would kneel to the invaders? Amidst it all, humanity's leaders, those who had rallied us, driven us to stand, met in secret. Hidden deep beneath the earth, they plotted and planned, knowing the road ahead would be long and perilous. One voice, strong but worn from days without rest, spoke up. We cannot win this alone. We need more than courage. We need allies. But who? No other species had dared to challenge the Empire. None would risk their lives for a species that, to them, was still little more than a distant curiosity. And yet, hope, fragile and flickering, remained. There were rumors, whispers of those who had once opposed the Empire, who had been cast out or broken but still lived. The air grew tense. Every second lost was a second closer to the Empire's reinforcements. Decisions had to be made, risks taken. To stand alone was certain death, but to reach out to the unknown to possibly bring another into our desperate fight was a gamble, one that could change everything or leave us more vulnerable than before. Above, the Empire's ships loomed, waiting for the moment to strike again, their weapons primed to crush resistance. Below, humanity plotted, fought, and held its breath. In the dark corridors and flickering fires of a world in turmoil, one truth remained unshakable. The fight had only just begun, and in this battle for survival, every choice, every moment mattered. And so, as tensions rose and alliances formed, our struggle continued. A fierce, blazing stand in the shadow of a relentless enemy. The Empire's warships hung above Earth like the wrathful eyes of ancient gods. For days and nights, their presence was an unending reminder of what hung in the balance. Cities that once thrummed with life had become battlegrounds of fire and ruin. Humanity had no choice but to fight on, even as every encounter pressed us closer to the brink. Imperial troops, now wary of our traps and tactics, adapted quickly. They moved with precision, their steps calculated to push us back at every turn. But even as we bled, we held our ground. For every street they claimed, they paid dearly. For every block taken, we swore 10 would rise in resistance. Underground shelters overflowed with civilians, families huddled together, children staring wide-eyed at makeshift broadcasts that told stories of bravery and loss. Everywhere, there was a hum of tension, a waiting that gnawed at nerves. Supplies ran thin. Exhaustion became a weight none could ignore. Still, beneath the surface, sparks of something unbreakable kept burning. Engineers worked by candlelight, fashioning weapons from scraps and salvaged tech. Scientists, hidden in bunkers, raced to decode the Empire's technology, seeking weaknesses that might turn the tide. Among them was an old researcher, hunched over glowing screens, muttering to himself. He had lived through wars before, but nothing like this. There has to be a way, he whispered to the darkness, desperation pressing into every syllable. Our leaders moved quickly, gambling everything on a fragile thread of hope. The rumors of those who had once defied the Empire became their guiding light. Secret missions were launched, each one riskier than the last. Small bands of fighters slipped through enemy lines, whispering into the vastness of space, seeking those who might still stand against the Empire's tyranny. Every message sent was a chance that could backfire, revealing our weakness to the enemy. But desperation demanded courage, and so they kept sending their calls for aid. Days passed with no reply. On the front lines, the fighting grew fiercer. The Empire's troops unleashed new weapons, horrifying things that tore through concrete and steel with ease. Whole districts were leveled in moments. Yet, even when all seemed lost, humanity's spirit refused to crumble. Fighters emerged from the ruins, their faces lined with determination. There was a sense among them that they weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every life lost, every soul taken by the Empire's hand. Every fallen comrade was a reminder of what was at stake. Amid the chaos, a small group of human operatives penetrated the Empire's outer defenses, stealing vital information. What they discovered sent shockwaves through every resistance cell. The Empire was preparing for a final strike, a weapon of such devastating power it would leave Earth uninhabitable. This was not about control anymore. The Empire wanted an example, a reminder to any who would resist. Our leaders met in hushed urgency. Panic threatened to swallow every hope. If this strike came, all would be lost. But the old researcher, eyes burning with a mix of exhaustion and clarity, finally spoke up. He had found a possible weakness, a chink in the Empire's technological armor. It was a desperate gamble, reliant on precise timing, and it demanded all of humanity's remaining strength. But if they could disable even one of the Empire's key ships, the cascade of chaos might be enough to turn the tide. As word spread, the resistance prepared. Every able body joined the fight, every ounce of energy spent for this one chance. Fighters sharpened their weapons and whispered goodbyes. Civilians worked tirelessly to support the war effort, knowing that every moment mattered. All eyes turned to the sky. This would be humanity's final stand. And then, something changed. Across static-filled channels, a response came, faint, distant, but unmistakably real. Allies, remnants of shattered worlds, those who had survived the Empire's wrath, were answering our call. Their ships, battered and worn but alive, surged into view. Humanity had not fought alone after all. The gamble had paid off, but the danger remained. Every second counted as plans were set in motion. The fate of Earth balanced on a razor's edge. As the battle raged, tensions reached a fever pitch. Imperial ships descended, their power and fury unmatched. Our allies joined the fray, their arrival shocking the Empire's forces. Above and below, the war became a maelstrom of destruction. The ground quaked, the sky burned, and amidst it all, humanity pushed forward, risking everything on a chance that defiance could still matter. The Empire was prepared to end us, but we were not yet ready to die. In this storm of fire and resolve, the climax drew ever closer, and the breath of a world waited, not yet exhaled. The sky was a chaotic swirl of fire and light as human and allied ships clashed with the Empire's forces. Every second counted as fighters spiraled and darted through the clouds, weaving between searing beams of energy. The ground below trembled with each deafening blast. The resistance pushed forward, drawing strength from the arrival of their unexpected allies. For a fleeting moment, hope sparked brighter than it had since the war began. But it didn't last long. The Empire had anticipated their resilience, and it had more surprises in store. The second wave of the Empire's fleet descended, larger and deadlier than before. Among them was a ship unlike any seen before, a monstrous vessel bristling with weaponry, its surface pulsing with a strange, almost organic glow. As it emerged, an uneasy silence rippled through the human channels. Sensors scrambled to analyze it, but none could make sense of the readings. The Empire had held back its true power until now. The monstrous vessel unleashed a blast that sliced through the battlefield, obliterating everything in its path. Allied ships disintegrated before anyone could react, their ashes raining down like a grim reminder of the odds stacked against them. On the ground, the old researcher and a small team worked frantically. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he analyzed every scrap of data on the new threat. There had to be a way to weaken it, some flaw they could exploit, but nothing fit. Frustration mingled with exhaustion until one of his assistants, a young woman with wide, determined eyes, gasped, "Sir, look at this." She pointed at a data stream, anomalous readings that spiked every time the ship fired its weapon. It was using something different, something that twisted physics itself. But that wasn't the only revelation. The energy signatures matched ancient records, whispers of an empire that had once rivaled the current Galactic Empire, only to vanish mysteriously. Their technology was now repurposed and weaponized. The implications were staggering. The Empire had unearthed ancient power that should have remained buried. It was unstable and devastatingly effective. The team realized they might be able to use that instability against it, but to get close enough to exploit it meant almost certain death. The old researcher's hands trembled as he relayed the plan to the resistance leaders. It was madness, but there was no other choice. Every second counted. High above, a pilot, grizzled and battle-worn, listened to the orders crackling through his com. He glanced at the photo taped to his cockpit, a reminder of why he fought. "Roger that. I'll get it done." His heart pounded as he broke formation, dodging blasts that seemed to aim for him alone. Others followed, knowing full well what lay ahead. As the pilots raced toward the monstrous vessel, the Empire tightened its grip. Its smaller ships swarmed like locusts, desperate to protect their prize. The resistance fought back with all they had, but every move carried a terrible cost. One by one, their numbers thinned. Each loss carved a deeper wound, but none turned back. On the ground, trails struck. Collaborators, hidden among the resistance's ranks, moved at the Empire's behest. Sabotage erupted within critical operation centers. Communications were severed, defenses weakened. Chaos erupted as fighters scrambled to contain the new threat. The old researcher, now with blood staining his hands from a fallen friend, shouted for order. He knew they couldn't afford to splinter now, not when everything teetered so dangerously close to collapse. In the skies, the pilot reached the vessel, the monstrous ship towering over him. As he prepared to engage the unstable energy core, a warning flashed, a surge detected, and it wasn't coming from the Empire's weapon. Earth itself trembled. The realization struck like lightning. The energy was tearing at the fabric of reality, threatening more than just the battle. The Empire was gambling with forces that could unmake everything. Panic turned to grim resolve. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about saving existence itself. The battle raged, stakes higher than ever as hope clashed with the abyss. The sky erupted in fire and chaos as the battle raged on, the monstrous Empire vessel dominating the air with its relentless power. Every second counted, and every breath felt like it could be the last. The pilot, sweat staining his eyes, pushed his battered craft closer to the colossal ship. His hands shook, but his resolve was unbreakable. He had a mission, one final strike that could change everything. Behind him, his comrades fought with everything they had, creating a path with their lives, their ships burning as they fell one by one. The realization that this was a one-way journey settled heavily, but none faltered. Too much was at stake. Below, the old researcher worked feverishly, coordinating every movement, every desperate attempt to disrupt the Empire's control. Warnings blared as the vessel's energy core continued to destabilize. Its power threatened to rip apart not just the battlefield, but reality itself. The air felt electric, crackling with a dangerous energy that made every breath painful. The team's hope now rested on timing. precise and unforgiving. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm in range. You have seconds to get clear." His comrades' replies were brief, raw with emotion. "Good luck. See you on the other side." He didn't look back. With a final burst of speed, he maneuvered past the Empire's defenses, hurtling toward the vessel's exposed core. Alarms blared inside his cockpit. He armed the payload, his grip tightening around the controls. Time seemed to slow, every heartbeat echoing like thunder. At the last moment, the Empire's vessel flared with light, its energy destabilizing further. But then, an unexpected twist. A signal cut through the noise, broadcasting across all channels. "Stop. It's too unstable." It was an Imperial voice, panicked and urgent. For a split second, everyone hesitated, even as chaos still raged around them. The message continued, "If you destroy it now, it'll trigger a collapse that we can't contain. Everything will fall." Confusion rippled through the resistance ranks. Was it a trick? But the desperation in the voice felt real. The old researcher's mind raced. Could the Empire be telling the truth? If they were right, destroying the vessel could unravel reality itself. Yet if they did nothing, the Empire would continue its reign of terror. Above, the pilot heard it too. His grip faltered for a moment, doubt creeping in. Then he gritted his teeth, eyes blazing with determination. "We've come too far to turn back." He pushed forward, knowing the decision was his alone to make. The others, watching from the ground and air, held their breath. It all rested on him. As his ship closed in, the core's energy surged again, blinding light crackling across the battlefield. And then, silence. For a breathless moment, nothing moved. The pilot's ship vanished in the light, swallowed by the core's energy. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The world teetered on the edge, waiting for everything to shatter. But instead of destruction, a strange stillness fell. The core flickered, pulsed, and then collapsed inward, swallowing itself in a burst of light. The monstrous vessel shuddered, its structure crumbling. Without its source of power, it imploded, sending shockwaves rippling across the sky. The Empire's fleet, disoriented and leaderless, faltered. The tide had turned. The battlefield erupted with shouts and cries. Relief, exhaustion, grief. Humanity had survived, but the victory felt hollow. They had paid dearly, and the fight was not truly over. The Empire still existed, wounded but dangerous. And in the aftermath, the true nature of the energy core lingered like a dark shadow. The old researcher, staring at the flickering data, realized something chilling. The core's energy had not just collapsed. It had opened something. A fracture in the fabric of reality. And from that fracture, something watched. Humanity had won this battle, but a new threat loomed, one far more dangerous than any they had faced before. The fight was over, but the war had only just begun. As the remnants of the Empire's colossal vessel drifted into space, the battlefield quieted, save for the soft hum of broken ships and the crackle of static in the air. The explosion that had shattered the Imperial fleet had also scattered the resistance forces, and for a moment, no one knew what to do. The tension was thick, relief mixed with confusion, exhaustion clinging to every fighter on the ground and in the sky. Humanity had made it through, but the cost was far too high. Amid the wreckage, survivors crawled from beneath the twisted metal, bloodied but alive. They gathered what they could, salvaging weapons and supplies. Every victory felt like a grim reminder of the many who had fallen. The old researcher, staring at the data he had collected, turned to the leader of the resistance, his face ashen. "The core may have collapsed, but it's not over. What we unleashed, it's not just the Empire's power we've awakened. We've opened a door. Something is coming." The leader, his face hardened with the weight of all they had endured, nodded grimly. He had known this fight was not the end, not truly. The battle had been won, yes, but the Empire wasn't gone. They would rebuild, adapt, and return stronger than ever. And now, humanity had made an enemy of something far worse. Whatever had been released through the fracture in space and time would find them. Sooner or later, there would be no hiding from it. But there was something else, something the researcher said that kept nagging at the leader's mind. "What does that mean?" Something is coming. What exactly? The researcher didn't respond immediately. His eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the energy core's collapse had created an ominous rift. It was silent now, but every piece of data they had gathered suggested the rupture was just the beginning. What had been freed from the crack was unknowable, but it was coming. It might not even be a physical force. It might be a new enemy, one that the Empire had kept hidden. Maybe something older, more dangerous. Whatever it was, the implications were chilling. The research had shown patterns, old, forgotten warnings from a civilization far older than the Empire itself. But even they hadn't been able to comprehend it fully. The silence stretched between them, thick with uncertainty. "You said it yourself," the researcher finally whispered, eyes narrowing as he checked the data once more. "It's not over." The leader, too weary to argue, nodded in reluctant agreement. Humanity's triumph felt like a fleeting moment in the shadow of what was to come. "Then we prepare," he said. "We fight again, but this time we do it smarter. We find out what's coming before it's too late." Overhead, the skies were clear once more, the looming threat of the Empire's armada dissipating with their retreat. The ground forces, their mission complete for the moment, began to regroup. A sense of unity returned. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about thriving in a new world that they would shape together. Families reunited, lost loved ones honored. The city, broken and battered, would be rebuilt, stronger. The scars would remain, but they would serve as a reminder of what humanity was capable of when it came together. As they prepared for the future, the old researcher found himself gazing at the distant horizon, the sense of dread creeping back. The fracture in space lingered like an open wound in the fabric of reality itself. He knew there was no going back. What had been released would eventually come for them, and when it did, humanity would need to be ready. But as long as the human spirit remained unbroken, as long as there were people who stood together in defiance, there was hope. The Empire might return. A new, even darker force might rise, but Earth would never fall, not while there was still a breath left to fight, not while humanity still had its will. And so the survivors moved forward. They rebuilt, they strategized, and they waited. The scars of battle were still fresh, but now they wore them with pride. The world had faced annihilation and survived. The Empire might come again. The rift in space might tear open new horrors. But humanity had learned one thing in this dark chapter. They were not as powerless as they had once believed. In the end, the victory was bittersweet, but it was theirs, and they would hold on to it, fiercely, because they knew that the fight for their future was far from over.